Hey guys, today we're going to work with our last lesson in chapter 9. Crazy, I know, right? So we're going to work with line plots again today. Now remember, line plots are these plots that use number lines, and we're going to build this one, but they have the X's above the numbers to show how many, okay? Remember, they're very similar to other graphs, but they specifically use only numbers, right? We could never have little pictures down here or things like that. So for this first page, you're going to open up to 573 and work along with me as we analyze the line plots that we learned to make last time. Okay, so that means we're just going to start using the graphs to answer questions. Okay, so for this first graph that they want us to build, I asked my friends and my family, how many times a week do most people eat dinner? Okay, and here were their answers. I had one friend who eats dessert only once a week, and they are stronger than me for sure. So we're going to come over here to our number 1, and we're going to put an X there, okay? I had 2 people who eat dessert 3 times a week. So remember, as you're building these plots, do the best you can to make sure that your X's line up so that it's easy to tell which ones have the same number. Okay? And I had 5 people who ate dessert 5 times a week, kind of like the same. So they don't eat it every day, but they eat it a lot of the days. So we're going to do 5 here, again, doing our best job to make a neat straight line and line up the rows together. So there's 2. Okay. All right. And then I had 1 person who has dessert every day. Okay. So you had 1 person. If I was just to look at this graph, if I was going to analyze this graph, I'd be able to, or this line plot, I'd be able to see that it's pretty easy to see, to answer the question, how many times a week do most people eat dessert? Okay. So just looking at this, which number has the most X's? Which one's the tallest? Which one has the most votes? And therefore is the answer of how many times a week do most people eat dessert? 5, right? Because we had 5 people who ate 5 times a week. So all we're going to write is 5 because that's the number of times a week that people eat. Don't get confused because that is the same as the number of votes, but it wants to know how many times a week people eat dessert, and that's that 5. Okay. All right, let's turn the page. Okay, so you can use data from a line plot to answer questions, right? Just like we do with all our other graphs, we can look at it and answer questions about it, whether it's which one has the most, which one has the least, what the different categories are, etc. So it's the same thing with line plots. It's just another way to organize information and be able to use that information because that's why we organize it. So this line plot shows the number of students in each class at a school. So we have 20, 21, and 22. We have 3 classes that have 20. We have 4 classes that have 21, and we have 1 class that has 22. Okay, so then it asks, how many students are in most of the classes? So it wants to know which number, which amount of students has the most. Okay, so we can easily tell by coming over here and looking which one's the tallest that the answer is what? 21, right? Because that's how many students are in most of the classes. All right. And you can see that it was already written in your book. Now don't get confused. When it asks you how many are the most, it doesn't want the number in this case, maybe sometimes it will, but it doesn't want the number of classes, it just wants the number of students that most classes have. Okay, so now we're using this line plot about number of hats that students have, and we're going to use the data from the line plot to answer the questions. Okay, so how many students have 2 hats? Okay, now this is where you don't want to get confused. You don't want to come down here and say it's this if it's 4 because there's 2 here. Remember, these are the votes. These are the number of students. So that's not what it's asking us. Those aren't the number of hats. Okay, the number of hats are down here because that's what's labeled. So how many students have 2 hats? You're going to come to the 2, and answer this number. Okay, this is just like what I said earlier. Sometimes they will ask you like that, but you just have to make sure that you're paying attention to what they're asking you about. If they were asking what number of hats had the most students, then it would be 2, but it's asking us who has 2. So we're going to count these. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there are 6 students that have 2 hats. So we're going to write a 6. How many students have just 1 hat? Same thing, we're coming down here to this 1 because this is the number of hats, and we're counting 1, 2, 3. Okay, and then how many students have 3 hats? Again, same thing. This is the number of hats, so we're coming to 3, and we're just counting 1, 2, 3, 4. Not too tricky, as long as you're paying attention to what they're asking, okay? For example, again, if it had said if it had said what number of hats has 3 students, then you would have to come and see the number of 3 students, okay? But for the most part, it's pretty simple that they ask you either one or the other. All right, how many students have more than 2 hats? Okay, so more than 2, we have 3, 4, and 5. So we're going to have to add up all these votes together. Okay, we already know that 3 has 4 because we just answered that. So we can use a counting on strategy and say 5, 6, 7. So 7 students have more than 2 hats. Okay, so how are line plots the same or different than bar graphs or picture graphs? Remember again, they're the same because they're organizing that information and we can use that information to answer questions, and they are different because they just use the number line and the X's, okay? They don't use pictures, they don't use bars, and they don't have different categories. It's all about total. It's all about the amount of something because of the numbers in that number line. Okay.